A very happy Holi to all our viewers. Some of us are working, but we hope that the rest of you have had a great Holi today and are now ready to return to the news cycle. Well, like always, we are focusing on the news that matters. And today we're looking again at the continued debate around the electoral bonds. Now, the electoral bonds and the data that has now come out in full on the orders of the Supreme Court are raising all manners of questions. It could be questions around Aurobindo Pharma, the pharmaceutical company that has links to the Delhi liquor scam in which Arvind Kejriwal has been arrested. This is a company that was an accused, it turned an approver, and it's now been found that it purchased bonds, most of them for the BJP. The AAP is saying that this is a clear conflict of interest. It could be the lottery king of India, Santiago Martin. We now know from the DMK's own submissions to the Election Commission how much money they received to the tune of 509 crores from Santiago Martin. Or it could be companies like Megha Engineering, the number 2 buyer of bonds in this country, in our country, that has distributed or tried to distribute its bonds equally or somewhat equally across parties, buying bonds for the Congress, for the BJP, and for the JDS. All manners of questions are arising from these electoral bonds. And one of the key questions is being raised, in fact, by the bureaucrat who implemented the bonds. And that is the question of whether anonymity, which was the key principle of the bonds before it was struck down, was ever upheld at all. Joining us in the program today, and we're grateful he's sharing his time on this festival day, is Mr. Garg. And Mr. Garg, you've seen, has been a regular on our programs, and he was one of the first to actually make the argument that even if the SBI were to release all the unique IDs, we would not be in a position to match the data. In fact, we are in the position to match the data. Mr. Garg, I know you're clarifying something, so let me bring you into the conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
This is not the argument I ever made.
Okay.
My argument was that there was no identification number or identifier on the bond. And in the absence of any identifier or identification bond, even if you release the data which the Supreme Court asked for, at which denomination, which date, and what amount of the electoral bond bought by the buyers and deposited. If you had these 3 pieces of information, which the Supreme Court initially asked for, you would not be able to match the buyer with the donors. I had always also said that I think this was perhaps I mentioned for the first time, people not even aware that there was an alpha-numeric code embedded in the electoral bond, but that was not to serve as an identifier or in the identification number. This was not supposed to be recorded by anyone, including SBI, and therefore, if this number is not recorded, you cannot identify the buyer with the political party. However, I had also said this, that if for any reason SBI had recorded this this alphanumeric code, then it is the whole game is given away. That's as easy. Any rookie, any computer analyst can find out, match the bonds for the buyer and the political party had the alphanumeric code. That is what I have consistently said.
Okay, let me now come in with my question. You have framed the conversation very clearly, and you said that this numeric code, while there, was not meant to be recorded. And now it is quite clear, given that even those of us who do not understand numbers very well have been quite easily been able to match the purchaser with the recipient. You have gone on record, and I want you to clarify and elaborate on this, that what the SBI has done, therefore, because it has clearly recorded the alphanumerics of the buyers and the recipients, making it possible for all of us to join the dots. You have argued that this is in violation of the law under which the electoral bonds were in fact introduced. You were the bureaucrat who implemented them. Can you talk about why you are saying that what the SBI did was patently unlawful?
the scheme was very elaborately laid down. If you go through the scheme along with its annexures, which has a very detailed application forms, etc., and all things are very described in detail. It also lays down what details the buyer will provide at the time of making the purchase and what will go into the record of the SBI. Those records nowhere mentions the alphanumeric code. In fact, the alphanumeric code was not supposed to exist for anyone, including SBI. This was a security feature embedded in the electoral bonds only to be used in the event that there was a suspicion that fake electoral bond has come to the SBI. It could have been identified by the SBI if there was no alphanumeric code, or it could have been sent to our printing presses, which printed it, and to verify whether something which they have received was a fake one. By the way, this was a very, very remote possibility because the duration of the bond was 15 days. It could not have been printed. And for every cycle, SBI had this data that how much of the bond had been sold and how much of the bonds have been deposited. And the cycles were always separate. They were not overlapping. And therefore, the use of alphanumeric code, the security feature, was never intended. And therefore, SBI was also not supposed to record it. That is the reason why I have always said that this is not something which anyone needed to be aware of. It's not part of the scheme. It's not part of the system.
Given what you've seen unfold over the last few days, yes, of course, the Supreme Court struck down the bonds on the very principle of anonymity that you say the SBI was legally bound to uphold, at least till this moment. Given what you have seen transpire, given the data that is now in public domain, would you say that the SBI was or is in violation of the law?
Actually, Barkha, I think SBI committed two big mistakes. Number one, it recorded meticulously the alphanumeric code against each of the purchase. And secondly, it also recorded the alphanumeric code against each political party when they deposited. This was not supposed to be done. This was, but this has been done very clearly now, given the facts which have emerged now. The second mistake which SBI did, in my judgment, was when they sort of invented that excuse. When they invented this excuse to get time until the elections were over. The court had asked to give them these three sets of data on both sides, which were easily available. Perhaps the SBI or the government, we don't know that for sure, were not interested even in providing those simple three sets of data on both sides. And then when they thought, why, who would give us time until June end? Then they came up with this excuse, very surprisingly, that we will match the data lying in two silos, and for that we will need the 3 months or 4 months time. So these two mistakes. The second gave away. Actually, the whole world came to know probably of the alphanumeric code or the secret code only when the SBI made this excuse for postponing delivery of the data which the Supreme Court has asked. These two mistakes actually gave away and made this absolutely secret feature into a very, very public and common feature.
So you are making the argument that two things that the SBI did were, one was false and the second was in violation of the law. The falsehood was that the SBI said in its first affidavit before the Supreme Court that it needed time for 3 months because the data existed in two silos, which you think was an excuse to push submitting this data beyond the elections. But secondly, and that is in fact even more potentially serious, is your argument that as per the law, the SBI was not meant to be recording data that it clearly did. Now, I have an additional question. Before this data came into the public, we actually had 3 or 4 political parties, the DMK, the AIADMK, the JDS, and the AAP, partially releasing data that told us that, for example, the DMK received 37% of donations by the lottery king Santiago Martin. The AIA-DMK received a bulk of its money from the Chennai Super Kings. We even knew the exact amount. The DMK said they received 509 crores worth of electoral bonds from the lottery king. Now, I'm playing these numbers because these numbers came into the public domain, Mr. Garg, even before all of the data was submitted. Now, my question, maybe this is a dumb question, so please forgive me, but if the SBI was not meant to record the alpha-numerical data, were political parties, according to the electoral bond's original vision, meant to know who was giving it exactly how much money?
See, Barkha, the buyer always knew who it is donating to. Right. It was
Correct.
not that.
But was the recipient meant to know? Was the recipient meant to know?
Similarly, the recipient always knew who is donating it to. But that was their personal private knowledge. They were not prevented by law to disclose this. This was their own volition. For example, if a company earlier wanted to disclose to its shareholders, its board of directors, or otherwise that we are donating this much bond to somebody, some political party, it was not prevented. The scheme did not require them to do it. And therefore, the anonymity was if the purchaser is not interested to get it disclosed. So that the system should not be able to decipher this. What you are referring to, the disclosures by some of the political parties, this relates to pre-2019 bonds, which, as per the Supreme Court's interim direction, the political parties were required to tell the election commission in a sealed cover the data relating to. In fact, there was no express direction that the political parties have to tell the election commission that who did they receive it from. That's why you have some of the parties delivering this information, someone inventing an excuse like saying somebody left it at our door and we don't know who, and many did not disclose because this was not a mandatory requirement of the interim order, right? Curiously, even today, the data relating to each of the purchaser and the depositor for the bonds which were bought before 12th of April 2019 is not in public domain. It's the data which is after 12th of April, because the express direction in the case is for the bonds delivered after or bought after the 12th of April or deposited after 12th of April. In fact, now, since it has been done for the post 12th April bonds, the government or the election commission or the Supreme Court or SBI should release that data for the pre-2019 bonds of about 4,000 odd crores as well.
So there is still data that has not been released, which is a very important point, and I don't know how many people have processed that. So that's one important point, which is the pre-2019 data. But I want to come back to this point that you make about the SBI's argument in its first affidavit, where they argued that they need a lot of time. And even at that time, you had said कि ये तो 10 minute का काम है. That time you were not aware that the alpha-numerics had been in fact recorded. Now, my question to you is, do you believe the SBI thus, and I'm using this word carefully with some caution, do you believe the SBI in its first affidavit misled or lied to the court?
See, I won't use that expression. I don't think the SBI would deliberately try to do it. I have always said, including on your shows, that they were perhaps looking for some excuse to delay the disclosure of the parent data which the Supreme Court had asked for. That simple data which could have been delivered in 10 minutes or a day, right? That data, for some reason, which we don't know, we should find out who actually SBI was acting on behalf, on its own, or on behalf of the government or otherwise, that even this simple three sets data for the buyer and the electoral and the political parties may not be delivered or declared or disclosed before before the elections are over. In that, they invented this excuse. That I am very clear that this was invented as an excuse. Now, whether this, I don't think this was intended to mislead the court. I think perhaps their intention was that if the court gets impressed that yes, you will need some of this time, then it will give time and we will be saved with the whatever embarrassment or otherwise of disclosing this minimum data without alpha-numeric numbers. So I wouldn't say this was go by or assert. You can only go by what the facts of the situation is. That petition was a very, very poor petition, very much
The SBI's petition, the SBI's
Yes.
first petition.
It was a very disingenuous way of sort of trying to get time from the court, but not disclosing what the court has in the first instance asked.
Let me ask you this. You say you won't go so far as to say that the SBI misled the court knowingly or intentionally, and therefore a key question becomes, was the SBI acting on its own or someone's instructions? We don't know. But clearly what it said in its first affidavit was an excuse and was a poorly argued case. But now to your other point, that the SBI was in fact in violation of the law when it recorded these alpha-numerics that are now clearly in the public domain. Now, my question to you is, what is the legal question thrown up by this, given that the Supreme Court has now struck down the anonymity? You are saying, looking back, this anonymity principle has been clearly violated in any case by the SBI. So what are the legal implications if what the SBI did by recording these alpha-numerics was unlawful? What are the legal implications today?
I think whenever we discuss about, by the way, this was not meant to be recorded as per the scheme. There was no law as such which debarred, because this was not even required to be sort of acknowledged that there's something like this existed. And something which is non-existent, you don't pass a law.
But the anonymity was at the core of the scheme, and by
Exactly.
recording the alpha-numerics, basically the SBI was in violation of the anonymity principle.
Correct. So the SBI was certainly sort of violating that objective, the key objective, the critical feature of the scheme, that the system should not create any situation where you are able to link the buyer with the political party, because that is what the buyers demanded as a precondition for using this scheme for giving donations. They were not interested to know, to anyone know. And I think the confidence was built. That is why 16,000 crores got built. Secretly or unknowingly, SBI was recording, was perhaps not known even to the parties, right? Now, whether SBI started doing it for building some sort of audit trail on its own for its internal purposes, very confidentially, or was it asked by someone that you record this data and then supply to us so that we can know? We don't know that. That information is not available. So someone should actually find out why SBI started recording it on its own or at the behest of someone. and which actually compromised the key feature. Now, legal consequences, if you want to my mind, the sufferer are only the buyers who donated. Political parties, it doesn't matter, because the scheme doesn't exist. So in future, no donations will come through this scheme. But the buyers or the companies which bought the bonds under the statutory guarantee that this would not be known ever, that who they donated to. Now they have been left in lurch. They have also been left in lurch in another respect, where they might have run foul of the law. The law amended said that loss-making companies can make political donations through electoral bonds. The companies can make more than 7.5% of their profits as donations. Now they have suddenly, in retrospect, have become in violation of all this. Their protection that this would not be known is gone. Second, someone who had sort of used the electoral bonds for more than 7.5% of its profit, or had used the bonds despite the company making losses, they might have lots of legal consequences. So they would perhaps need to find out how would they meet this challenge. And of course, this trust which has been broken now, they would rue their misfortune. That's the most I can put it, in case they feel that way. But the legal consequences of violating the law beyond 7.5% and loss making would be the real ones which they'll face for quite some time.
But what was what was the logic in allowing loss-making companies? You know, one of the top 10 buyers is the company called Madan Lal Private Limited, which had losses and then a few months later purchased bonds. You've had Quick Supplies. There's been a lot of speculation who actually owns the company that had a small profit but still invested in these bonds. What was the logic in thinking that loss-making companies should not just be allowed, but why should loss making companies be investing in political bonds?
See, I think that in one of the first discussions on your channel, the difference between the idealism and the pragmatism.
Yes.
Tell me, why should a loss-making company in a line of business in which a profit company is also operating uh, face an unequal playing field simply because it's in losses?
Because it's not supposed to be getting anything back unless there's a quid pro quo. So if you are already
Exactly.
with less money, why do you want to buy bonds?
No. Precisely for the same reason. If you are competing for a contract and you know that you will have to deliver something in the form of some gratification or whatever, quid pro quo or whatever, if the loss-making company is not in a position to do it, whereas profit-making company is in a position to do it, then it makes the field unequal. So why should the loss-making companies be deprived from using this channel to earn the same kind of benefits which the profit-making is done? So I don't see any reason. And by the way, the loss-making companies are not in the business of charity. If they are making a donation, a political donation by way of electoral bonds, they would consider this as part of their cost to work out what is the advantage of getting into making this contribution or not contribution. This is the
Now,
real life situation.
now let's take one of the most discussed bonds because it links to what's happening in the national capital where the chief minister has been taken into custody. Now, the opposition has made the point, and this was actually found out by journalists well before the opposition. We also reported this story that one of the companies was Aurobindo Pharma. Aurobindo Pharma was an accused in the Delhi liquor scam. It was considered part of the South cartel that is accused of actually having paid kickbacks to the Aam Aadmi Party. Now, 5 days after the promoter director of this company is in fact arrested, not 5 days, I think a few days after he is arrested, you actually have him purchasing 5 crores worth of bonds for the BJP. Eventually, under Aurobindo Pharma, that amount is 34.5. Under affiliated companies, all cumulatively, the amount ends up being 55 crores to the BJP. Another, we also know that Aurobindo Pharma gave 15 crores to the BRS and another, I think, 2 or 2.5 crores to the TDP. Now, I bring this up because, Mr. Garg, as you must be well aware, the argument is being made that this is a clear demonstration of the kind of quid pro quo, the dangerous quid pro quo that the bonds can be about, where one politician is arrested in a case, another man, a businessman who wasn't accused, becomes an approver, he buys bonds, and his bail is not opposed. I mean, this is the way the conversation is being framed. How do you look at it? Give me a second. I have to unmute you. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
The least you can give credit to the electoral bonds is the fact that whatever this trail which you are describing in this case of this, in the case of this particular company, is out only because the electoral bond scheme operated, right? So imagine if the electoral bond scheme was not there, and the personnel involved were still supposed to be sort of converted into approver or whatever, right? And they would have made the donations or the contributions even otherwise. Was there a guarantee that if the electoral bond scheme was not there, this quid pro quo or this kind of contribution would not have been made? My sense is that it's because of the bond scheme now you can actually establish, if at all you need to establish, a clear trail connected with the dates and other kind of things. Then the other trail which the ED or otherwise is trying to establish for the kickbacks or whatever it was taken in the case of the excise policy. We don't know any facts, so I am not in a position to comment. I am only commenting on the fact that you can't blame the electoral bond scheme for the donations made in this company simply because the donations are now knowledge in the public knowledge. You should rather be grateful.
So you're saying Aurobindo Pharma could have as easily donated by cash and nobody would have been any the wiser?
Absolutely.
But the bonds were also supposed to be anonymous. ये तो Supreme Court की वजह से ये सब चीजें बाहर आ रही है ना.
This is in retrospect. It's not. The Supreme Court is within its right to declare something unconstitutional. But believe me, this was the law of the land that this scheme would operate with this kind of feature. Complete transparency on the one end, and also in the other end, only the linking non-transparency in the middle. That was the way the policymakers thought that this is the best way to encourage electoral funding.
But can I take a question from one of the members of our in our live stream right now? Pradeep Sethi says, earlier the system was no different from electoral bonds, but the electoral bonds effectively did not put an end to the previous process. Parties were still permitted to receive donations under that system. That's one point. Secondly, we now know that, kuch hi nahi badla. In a way, nothing actually changed. I think you had once called it the least evil of all forms of political financing. It looks to the ordinary citizen that nothing actually changed.
So prior to the electoral bonds, the two schemes existed. You can make fully transparent either directly or through the trust route under the Companies Act, or you can make in cash, partly 20,000 plus in disclosed form, below 20,000 undisclosed form. Now the electoral bond scheme came in as the third option. One could have argued that when the electoral bond scheme was brought in, the other two schemes could have been completely outlawed because you wanted to channelize all of them. No, there are many companies in the country who would have still like to make completely transparent non-political donations, and there would still be many, including small donation guys, who would like to make the contribution in cash. Therefore, the government only changed that 20,000 rupees limit for cash donation became 2,000 rupees limit for the cash donations. And you had the menu of options. Now, whoever find it advisable to go through the fully transparent route, go through that. Whoever thinks no, cash route is still beneficial for me, go through that route. But bulk of the family, and it's the proof of eating. In the proof of pudding is in the eating. The fact that 16,200 crores of the bonds came through, or the funding came through the electoral bonds, which if you were to aggregate, is perhaps an amount higher than all the political funding received since 1991, is the fact that the scheme was actually it succeeded. It served the risks which people wanted to take care of.
Now, that debate will continue, pro or anti the bonds, but I want to come back to where we started. You said that the entities that are potentially going to suffer are those who purchase the bonds, not the recipients, but the buyers who did it on the guarantee of anonymity. And now that anonymity is busted, the SBI was in violation of that principle because the alpha-numerics were being recorded. We don't know if the SBI was acting on its own or on instructions from somebody. The question is, what happens now? Technically, I'm imagining that there is an entity that can go to court and say, when I bought this bond, I was promised anonymity. The anonymity may have been struck down today in 2024, but in 2019, 20, 21, 22, that anonymity was promised to me. Could the SBI be sued?
See, FICCI and some other FICCI and one or two other industry body did go to the Supreme Court and try to intervene to say that don't disclose the details, right? Supreme Court did not hear them. That's fine. Now that was the industry body. Individually, someone can muster courage, but the point is that I think this is a pointless exercise now for them, because the information is already out in the public domain. You can only manage the fallout, or you can ask for the compensation. But what kind of compensation you would ask for, and what kind of fallout? So fallout, as I said earlier, if you have run foul of the company law, now having donated more than 7.5% or loss making, you would need to, perhaps you can go to the court to say that let me not suffer the consequences under the company's laws of having violated in retrospect of something which was offered as a statutory guarantee to me. Let there be no consequences around that. Whether they would ask for compensation or not, that's a different matter. And more daring may go for this, that this is the loss cost to us. But more reasonable guys who have to manage the fallout will perhaps try to ensure that somehow they are not penalized or they're not proceeded against for having violated the company law provisions in retrospect.
Well, there is a question related to that on the loss-making companies, because those are the ones who are likely to potentially face maybe, I don't know, action under the Companies Law Act. Srinivasan Ranganathan says it's a joke that loss-making companies should not be deprived. Where are they bringing the money from, and what sort of competition can they have with profit-making companies? So, Mr. Garg, isn't there a contradiction that the thinking at that time was that loss-making companies should be permitted, but today they could face potential action against the Companies Law Act? Wouldn't the Companies Law Act have been reconciled with allowing these loss-making companies to purchase bonds at the time that the bonds were implemented?
The law was aligned. The law.
So why can they face action today?
Because now this has been struck down with retrospective fact, as if there was no law which existed ever from 2017 onwards. So the law until 17 did not allow the loss-making companies to make officially donation. the law from 2017 to 24 allowed it. In 24, that amendment has been struck down, and therefore their act has become illegal. Now, this person who says it's a joke, I think you can always consider something as a joke if you are not aware of the real life situations. I had explained it. Maybe he's fully entitled to consider this as a joke, but it's a joke to see the loss-making companies competing with their hands and legs tied against and continuously remaining at a disadvantage. I don't think this was a very well considered decision and a very equitable and appropriate decision for creating the level playing fields for loss-making companies or beyond 7.5%. Leave it to their commercial judgment that what is required for in their interest, how much they are running companies, they are in the business. Ultimately, they would like to be in profit or something. Right.
Now, last question to you with another question from our audience. Shankar Iyer says, with this Supreme Court decision, cash will be back in play. Effectively, the Supreme Court decision has encouraged cash. Now, this is the point you've been making about, while you don't agree at all with how the SBI has handled itself in the Supreme Court, you don't agree with the Supreme Court verdict. I think on one of my programs, you called it empty idealism. What happens now, Mr. Garg? We're in election season. What happens going forward? How are politics going to be funded here on?
See, I have no problem in principle with what Supreme Court decided. But in terms of its effect, I think it is very obvious, and we would not need to wait very long. The Lok Sabha elections are there. In last Lok Sabha elections, I think 2,000 odd crores came through the electoral bond or something. How would that funding come this time? Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. It would be interesting to watch. Most likely, in my understanding, either there would not be any funding officially, right? So the political parties will not receive funding from the companies, or some of the people who don't care and who perhaps like to be seen associated with some particular political parties may make the donation. That yes, take it fully transparent way or whatever they may make, or some of these people might be forced to give the donations in cash, as it was the case earlier. So let us watch out the fallout of this judgment. I have no comment on the sagacity of the Supreme Court or the merit. I think anyone would be very keen to see that we have in our country a fully transparent mode of political funding. But if that goal, that ideal is not achievable or has not been achieved in the past, if we can do, or if we can achieve as much transparency as we can possible, that was the answer the electoral bond scheme brought in.
The questions continue, Mr. Garg. You always give us food for thought. Thank you so much. I will let you get back to enjoying a little bit of your holy evening, and to our audience as well, many of whom have tuned in to hear your wisdom. Thank you, sir, and take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Barkha.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you, sir.
Mojo Story has always made a commitment to its viewers to go to where the story is. And as you can see here, we are at the epicenter of the Israel war on Gaza. We are right at the front line, about 1 mile from the Gaza Strip, as the Israeli military gets ready with its tanks and its gunners to begin its final frontal assault that will take troops into Gaza. As we said, we are not like other organizations. We believe in giving you all sides of the story objectively and as much as possible from the ground. And that's exactly what we're doing here, covering the biggest global story today from the epicenter of the war zone. So please, we need your support. Support us, become a Mojo member, subscribe to us, spread the word, and thank you for your support.